I will also post a copy of the recording on our website. I've included the website in the chat. So we'll go ahead and go over a couple of slides that I have today. And then at the end, I'll pause for questions and discussion. So if you haven't already muted yourself, if you can go ahead and do so just to make sure we don't pick up any background chatter, that would be great. Okay, so today we're going to talk about the Signs Part 2 Zoning Ordinance Amendment. We've been at this zoning ordinance amendment for about a year and a half now, focused on education and outreach. And now we're at the point where we have released draft text, and we'd like your feedback on that draft text. So please feel free to share any feedback. Like I said, we'll have some time at the end for discussion, questions, and comments. So for the zoning ordinance amendment, we are focusing on kind of three main topics. The first is going to be electronic display signs and those associated regulations. The next is going to be the entitlement process. So for the request for additional sign modifications, we are looking at a special exception process for that entitlement approach, and that will include revised application criteria as well as revised review standards. And then we also do have other revisions to assorted regulations throughout Article 7. That was previously the subject of a Part 1 amendment that was adopted in 2019 by the board. So first I'll start with those electronic display signs. So currently we do allow electronic display as part of a freestanding sign. We limit it to one electronic display sign per lot. The display area itself is limited to 50% of the maximum allowable freestanding sign area that's allowed for any given lot. We do have a requirement that at sunset there be a photo cell that dims the brightness levels automatically to no more than 100 nits. So we did, just to give an idea of nits, they are how you measure luminance. Common computer screens, high definition televisions, iPhones, they can range anywhere from 200 to 600 nits, commonly accepted. The higher end models, we do see up to 1,000 nits, and the latest iPhone is actually up to 2,000 nits, just to give you some context. We have received some feedback, especially from industry, that the 100 nit level is relatively limiting, and it does make those signs unreadable at sunset. So they wanted us to take a look at some of the best practices, see where other jurisdictions are landing, and look at possibly increasing that allowed nit level. So as proposed with the current text that we've drafted, we have proposed to increase the maximum brightness levels at sunset, and this is only for non-residential districts, up to 300 nits. So those residential districts, including non-residential uses in residential districts, would remain at the 100 nit level that's currently applied in the ordinance. And then we have included an advertised range for consideration and discussion, up to 500 nits. We also have included a new submission requirement in the draft text that would require sign specifications to be submitted as part of the sign permit application package that include what the program nit levels are. So that would just help us to ensure at the time of submission that they are complying with the maximum nit level limitations. The next focus, like I mentioned, is the entitlement process. We do currently have a variety of ways to request a modification of sign limitations. The first is a comprehensive sign plan, which we refer to as a CSP. That's only applicable and allowed for P district zoning areas. And this process involves approval by the Planning Commission. It does allow modification of any zoning ordinance sign standard, and it has some limited standards review criteria that are currently included today. The other way is through a special exception or an SE. That's allowed for CNI districts and does require Planning Commission recommendation as well as board approval. There is a limitation currently for the SEs on what can be modified. It's only allowed to increase sign area or sign height, as well as modify the location of signs. The standard applicable for the special exception is a very strict standard that does limit its use. You do have to prove that there's unusual circumstance or condition in certain different things like topography, location of the area, configuration, or access to the site. So again, that does limit the use. We only see about two, on average, two of these SEs per year. And then I will mention we do have a special permit available in certain for certain shopping center C districts, but that's only been used once, I believe, in the last 10 or 20 years. So that is not often used in the county. So as proposed, we are proposing to consolidate all those different application types into one special exception for sign modifications. This would continue to be available for all P districts, and we would expand it for the CNI districts to not just those that have that unusual circumstance condition, but those that are developed with a building group of buildings, office or industrial complex, or a shopping center that has a minimum gross floor area of 30,000 square feet. We have included a range as well up to 50,000 square feet for consideration and discussion purposes. We also did carry forward that unusual circumstance condition for those that can't meet that 30,000 square foot threshold. If they can meet the unusual circumstance, they could also apply for this special exception. So we do think that expanding it to the CNI districts does allow for placemaking and economic development opportunities while still ensuring that we have the public input of a public hearing and that we can impose development conditions and review the sign packages as well to ensure consistency and no adverse impact on the surrounding areas. We also do think it is appropriate for the sign packages in P districts to go through the special exception process, given that the board does approve the P district itself, and these sign packages can be quite detailed and have, impacts on the surrounding areas. We do want to specify exactly what can and cannot be modified with the special exception. So you could modify any residential sign limitations in P districts with that SE, as well as any of the commercial and I district sign limitations. Electronic display sign standards that I mentioned earlier, those can be modified up to a certain extent, and I'll go over the limitations we've included with that SE, as well as certain minor sign limitations. So, like your window sign provisions, your A frame sidewalk sign provisions, as well as roof signs, which are currently a prohibited sign type. We have specified with the SC that there are certain provisions that cannot be modified, such as the purpose of the sign standards and the administrative provisions, how signs are measured, that cannot be modified. Other prohibited signs, such as the wavy man signs that you see at certain gas stations, those would continue to be prohibited and not modifiable, and other certain standards that are listed in the provisions. Like I mentioned, we did want to add review standards. We hope that this would help to ensure consistent review and possibly even streamline the special exception process. We would want to ensure that sign sizes are compatible with the massing height and scale of the overall development, ensuring, like I mentioned, no adverse impact on adjacent developments. We do want to look at the materials to make sure that they're aesthetically compatible. Any sign placement is not adding to clutter or interfering with the vehicular, pedestrian, or bicycle traffic. And then, of course, if there are urban design guidelines that are applicable, we would want to make sure that the signs are consistent with those design guidelines. For electronic display signs, we would allow modification to allow increase in number, height, or the size of the freestanding signs for P districts. For CNI districts, we have included advertised options to allow increases in the maximum height and size of electronic display signs, but we have not included an option at this point to include more than one. So it would be limited to one electronic display sign in the CNI districts. We would also allow building mounted electronic display signs with the special exception. Currently, the by right limitations only allow for freestanding electronic display sign. And then with the SE, there could be a request to increase the brightness above that 300 nit level that we have now proposed as the maximum by right allowance, up to 600 nits. And we have also included an advertised range for consideration and discussion as well. And then just a couple of other changes that I'd like to mention. So currently for signs in reserved parking spaces, so these are the signs that say curbside pickup or veteran parking or electric vehicle charging stations. We, by interpretation, have allowed 1 square foot per sign currently. And we did want to, we looked at other jurisdictions and we found that other jurisdictions are not regulating these signs. So we have, as proposed, removed and would not continue that interpretation. So to exempt these sorts of signs from any sign limitations or permit requirements. That's something that we are still looking into, and we've gotten feedback that maybe we should add a maximum size of maybe 4 square feet. So we would like your feedback on that, as if we should regulate these sorts of signs or not regulate them. In terms of, and Jeff, I see your question. I'll just touch on the last couple of slides and then we'll circle back for that. Thank you. For ordering signs associated with a restaurant with a drive-through, those currently we do approve those via special exception as part of the restaurant with drive-through applications that go to the board. So we'd continue to look at these, but we did want to make it clear that they're not limited by the current freestanding sign limitations, which typically are only allow 1 freestanding sign for commercial and industrial lots. So we did want to exempt those signs and allow 20 square feet per ordering sign maximum. So to make sure that's clear that we do want to allow these sorts of signs as with that restaurant with the drive-through use. Window signs currently are not allowed to be illuminated. And so we do have a lot of window signs you'll see throughout the county that indicate that the business is open. So we wanted to acknowledge this practice and make sure that all of those signs are not continuing to be illegal. So we have included a allowance for 1 per business up to 4 square feet in size, could be an illuminated window sign. It cannot be moving, so it would need to be static and only allowed when the business is in operation. And then last but not least, for signs associated with a subdivision. So for going forward for these new signs, we would want to make sure that they are in common open space or an area that is designated for a sign easement. We have had situations where they're on private property, and then that does introduce some conflicts between, who is in control of the message on the sign, et cetera. So we have added for new signs going forward that they be located in an easement for sign purposes or common open space. And then just very briefly, we are currently doing some of our outreach. We do have an evening meeting next week as well that will be the similar presentation. And we are seeking authorization and public hearings at the end of this year. So we would like hopeful public hearings by December of this year. So that's where we're going. So we are looking for comments and feedback, really hoping to get those by the end of July so we can prepare a board item and include revised draft text as well for consideration. All right, so with that, I will pause and we'll start with Jeff's question. Anyone else, feel free to raise your hand and I'll go through and answer any questions or receive any comments that you have. And then anything that we don't get to today, feel free to email them my way, give me a call, and make sure that I get those comments. All right, Jeff, go ahead.
Thank you.
Oh, I think you're on mute again. If you could unmute yourself. We heard you when you said thank you, and then it went right back to being muted. Let me see if I can no, it won't let me unmute you. If you're unable to unmute, if you want to add it to the comment box, we can go to the next question. And if you want to add to the comment, we can circle back to there. Awesome, great. Okay, I think Bernie, I think I saw your hand next. If you want to go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes, we can. All right, pause, okay. Bernie, we're going back to Jeff. Oh, now you're muted again. All right, Bernie, go ahead.
Hey, Casey, how are you doing? Thank you
good,
for putting this together. I'm good,
Absolutely.
I'm good. Thank you for this. This is very informative. I've been following this from time to time, and I do have a couple questions more about, as I work on a lot of the CSP applications, it's rather, pleasant compared to all the other applications because it's rather streamlined and it's very quick. Typically, 5 to 6 months or so from application acceptance to Planning Commission approval.
Mhm.
With the proposal to switch this to an SE entitlement process, you're throwing in the Board of Supervisors into that. That could add on 2 to 4 extra weeks for a CSP to get approved. In some cases, in most cases, that's not a big deal. CSPs go through usually before buildings even ready for move-in, but there have been a number of cases where the property owner, the applicants initiated this process a little late in the game, and they're trying to get signs up on the building with people as they're already moving in. And usually they like to get the signs up before anyone moves in, so they have better idea. So having that extra time added onto the process could be, challenging and a little more frustrating for certain applicants. Also, this will also add to the application submission package and therefore complexity, such as an affidavit. SEs require an affidavit, correct? I believe so.
Yes, that is
So,
correct. Mhm.
so this will just add to the complexity of trying to assemble a CSP application and getting it out the door, and then having to make sure that's up to snuff at certain checkpoints during its review process. This is just kind of adding to the complexity of this, what it already is a rather simplistic process. Also, is the application fee, currently it's at 8,000 and some change. Will it jump up to 16,000 for a CSP, or will it remain?
No, it would remain at that 8,000 as part of the proposal.
Great. That's one good news right there.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So
Yeah.
I understand that staff, points out that the application or the parent rezoning is approved by the Board of Supervisors, but as it's written right now, a CSP requires an approved FDP to follow up, and FDPs are approved by the Planning Commission. Is it really necessary to move a CSP and a P district into the SE process? I mean, couldn't you just kind of focus this more on the CNI districts versus changing the process for the CSP and a P district, other than adding, some of the other little layers, like a more defined submission criteria? Because right now in the zoning ordinance, the submission criteria for a CSP is rather limited and is not encoded. I just want a little more color into that, because I
Sure.
do
No,
have some applicants who might not be too keen on the added process, and I just want to be able to explain it to them as best I
sure.
can.
And I appreciate that comment. I think we're hearing some of those comments being echoed from industry as well. We were hoping that this kind of struck a balance and a compromise in having one application type for sign modifications. We wanted to expand the placemaking and economic development opportunities to the CNI districts. So, we found that this was kind of a good, like I said, a good balance in having that one application process. We also did get feedback that in terms of the submission requirements, that it was actually going to be beneficial to codify those to give an expectation of what is needed instead of more of a guessing game on industry side. And this would hopefully streamline the acceptance process and make sure that the applications were complete and didn't result in any delays once it got into the staff analysis and review point of things. Just one other comment I will make in terms of the timeline. We have proposed that, either as with a follow-on motion or a board policy, that there be expedited scheduling for these types of special exceptions, similar to the commercial revitalization districts, so that the board date is actually scheduled at the same time as the Planning Commission date is being scheduled. So I know that doesn't completely get at the timeline process, but hopefully it is, again, a little bit of a compromise, but we will continue to chat internally about the comments that you've raised, Bernie, and like I said, I think you're in a similar boat with other people that represent their clients on the comprehensive sign plan. So I appreciate your
Right.
comments.
Yeah, no problem. And I really appreciate your response. And just to recap, right now, on average, an SE takes about 9 months. But with the expedited processing for scheduling, is it still anticipated 9 months for a CSP through the SE process, or can we still expect it to be 5 months-ish, 5 to 6 months?
I don't have that answer, but I can work with the zoning evaluation division and get kind of a guesstimate on average with the expedited processing.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate
Of
that.
course, absolutely. Before moving on to David, Jeffrey, did you want to try again with your muting? Oh, I see your comment. Okay, if HOA condo desire to put a sign on their property, what would be the process and when would a sign easement be
I
required?
just would like to please understand what process would a HOA or condo have to go through, and
Mhm.
even only would apply if they were going off their property. Would that be correct?
So yes, if they're doing some sort of like a subdivision sign, it could be allowed on common open space without any sort of easement. So if the HOA had a common area, it could be placed there. And I think Ian also has a similar question about how the sign updates applies to HOA common areas. So it would still need the applicable sign permit and any building permits that are required, which goes for all of your more permanent subdivision sign types. Um, the sign easement would only be required if it is on a private area. So if it's on a private lot, that's when you would need to go through and to add a sign easement. But common space, no easement would be required. All right. David, did you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, thanks, Casey.
Of course.
I've got a number of questions.
Okay.
One I think you answered in your presentation, and it was
Okay.
with regard to the current state of the electronic window signs.
Yes.
And so those are currently not permitted. And is it just that there's no enforcement, or?
That is correct. So
Okay.
if there were to be a complaint filed on that, we would, start an investigation and it would be enforced. But currently the window signs are considered a minor sign and no minor signs may be illuminated.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
And can you, I guess, explain how when you did your survey for the electronic display signs, how did you choose the 6 jurisdictions that you gathered the data on?
So we actually worked with a consultant, with Clarion Consultants to do an analysis, and we asked them for, assistance on if they had seen any sort of electronic display sign regulations. And those were some of the ones that they found in their research. And so they shared those with us. And we also just were looking at general jurisdictions. Not a lot of jurisdictions have limitations on the NIT levels. So I think there was one in New York that came to mind when we were just doing general research and looking for those sorts of limitations. Yeah, Glenville, New York was our staff research.
And what you're saying is that it was difficult to find a dimming constraint.
Yes, and it was actually difficult to find regulations on electronic display signs. A lot of those are not regulated in
Okay.
other jurisdictions. So we were mainly looking for jurisdictions that did have those and which ones were NIT levels as compared to some regulate via foot candles as well.
Right. Okay.
Mhm.
Can I ask some more?
Sure. Yes, I don't think we have any other questions at this
Okay.
point, so feel free.
Let's see. Did that with the new proposed combined special exception? You're saying that the request would be allowed in all P districts, and so since that incorporates some residential areas within the P districts, my question is, who can anyone submit a special exception? And then secondly, could that request for a special exception be for signage related to a home-based business in a residential area?
So you're specifically talking about P districts, is that correct?
Right.
So let me pull up the criteria just to see exactly how we've structured it for special exceptions. I do not believe that you could request any modifications for yard signs the way that we have structured it. Yes, so it would not allow for an increase in minor sign limitations for yard signs. So the home-based business would be a yard sign, and that would not be allowed. So they'd be limited to the 4 square feet for individual signs and 12 total square feet.
So I guess the question underlying that is, if I have a home-based business and I wanted a larger sign than that, this process would not allow that.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
And then the last one where you we're making a change to the determination for completion on construction signage in residential areas. You removed the component that said something like subject to all appropriate permits. So my question is with the removal of that final inspection criteria, how are you determining that that a job is complete?
So let me pull that up and make sure that I'm understanding your question. Yes, so my understanding is that we took out the inspection approval requirement with the understanding that a lot of the types of renovations and improvements don't actually require a permit or an inspection. So we'd be relying on our Department of Code Compliance investigators to determine whether or not the improvement or renovation is still ongoing, or if it is, if the job itself is done and the improvement work has been completed. And we also, it would be or 6 months, whichever is less. So oftentimes the 6 months is less than the length of the improvement project itself.
Right, and that's for the odd minor home improvement, but for the larger tear down activity, how would you determine a completion on a entire house build?
So usually if someone has moved in, let's say that the residential use permit has been issued and someone has moved in, and that I would say that would be considered completed construction. But
Okay.
Again, normally the 6-month time frame would most likely govern rather than if it's a longer project or a larger project.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. Let's see, do we have any other questions or comments on the proposal? Okay, well, hearing and seeing none. So my email address and my phone number is on the screen. So like I said, please feel free to send any comments or thoughts my way. I've added the website to the chat, and the draft text and associated cover memo is posted there. I will also include the copy of this recorded presentation. So if you do know anyone or any groups that might be interested, please feel free to send the presentation link and my information their way. I appreciate you all spending your lunchtime with me today. And like I said, looking forward to receiving any additional comments. All right. Have a great day. Thanks, everyone.